The history of PC gaming is so vast and expansive, it can often feel downright impossible to think of a definitive list of absolute must-play single-player titles on the platform. Thankfully, we've done all the hard work for you, and without wasting too much of your time, here are the 60 best single-player games well worth your time, from just about every era of gaming you can imagine. Ori and the Will of the Wisps. A sequel to Ori and the Blind Forest, Ori and the Will of the Wisps is a beautiful side-scrolling platformer that features excellent gameplay that is as engaging as it is accessible to players newer to the genre. The game also features a fantastic, gut-wrenching story, complete with compelling set pieces that can often be an absolute joy to play through thanks to the movement and combat options offered by the game. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. The first title by developer Machine Games in quite some time, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle puts players in the shoes of Indy as he sets off on yet another globe-trotting adventure following a break-in at Marshall College. The game features first-person combat, as well as an emphasis on puzzle solving. The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. There's a good reason to think about The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt almost an entire decade after its original release. Featuring an expansive world with tons of side quests, compelling characters, and an incredibly interesting main story filled to the brim with hard choices that the player has to make, The Witcher 3 truly allows players to walk in the shoes of titular Witcher Geralt of Rivia. Dragon's Dogma 2. While the game suffered from a few performance issues on launch, quite a few of these issues have been ironed out in the months since, turning Dragon's Dogma 2 into one of the most unique open-world fantasy RPGs out there. The game offers an incredible level of freedom to players not only in its combat, but also how its various systems work. After all, how often can an attempt to fast travel between cities get interrupted by a griffin flying in to attack the ox cart you're riding? Baldur's Gate 3. There have been a ton of excellent role-playing games released in the past year, but Baldur's Gate 3 pushed the entire genre to an altogether different level. The game features a fantastic cast of characters, a fun story, and an almost unparalleled level of freedom for how players can take on its many challenges. All of this is tied together by a modified version of the 5th edition of the Dungeons & Dragons tabletop rules. Black Myth: Wukong. A fast-paced action game heavily influenced by From Software's Souls line of games, Black Myth: Wukong has players taking on the role of the Destined One, tasked with collecting ancient relics to bring back Sun Wukong. The game features plenty of enemies to take on with an incredible combat system that is as fun to play as it looks. Grand Theft Auto 5. While it's been some time since we got a new GTA game, Grand Theft Auto 5 is certainly the pinnacle of the franchise. The game features a large map with the city of Los Santos, as well as the surrounding countryside and even some far-off desert zones. The game also features a fun story filled to the brim with heists that players can pull off, as a constant switch between controlling one of its 3 distinct protagonists. Elden Ring. Essentially, the ultimate form of the Souls-styled game. Elden Ring is a massive open-world title with tight combat, excellent boss fights, and the kind of cryptic storytelling that From Software has become famous for. Elden Ring brings in just about every aspect of the studio's previous titles, ultimately forming what can be considered a game that features just about the best aspects of titles ranging from Dark Souls to Bloodborne. Red Dead Redemption 2. Rockstar Games' most recent opus, Red Dead Redemption 2 is the ultimate form of a cowboy fantasy given life as a video game. Set during the decline of the Wild West, Red Dead Redemption 2 puts players in the shoes of Arthur Morgan, who, as part of a gang of outlaws, is constantly on the run from the law, while also trying to find a part of the world where he can fit in and call home. Cyberpunk 2077. Set in one of the greatest depictions of a cyberpunk city in video games yet, Cyberpunk 2077 puts players in the shoes of V, who sets off on a quest to make their mark on the city. The game features plenty of side quests, as well as a compelling main mission featuring Keanu Reeves, that has players trying to become a legend in Night City before the chip in their head fries their brain. Neva. As a fan of Gris, Neva will look very familiar, especially at the start, with its long walks, scenic environments, and foreboding atmosphere. Once tasked with rescuing the titular pup from the darkness and ensuring her safety, it's clear that the stakes are much higher. From one season to the next, the bond between Alba and Neva grows as they fight together, explore a snow-covered landscape, encounter new threats, and eventually separate, though not for long. It's an emotional journey that never feels overbearing, packed with surprisingly strong combat and excellent platforming. Silent Hill 2 Remake. Remaking a game that is considered by many to be the greatest horror game of all time is no easy feat, and Bloober Team succeeded at that task in spades. The game tells a cerebral story of a man who finds himself drawn to the titular city because of a letter he gets from his deceased wife. The game features plenty of heavy symbolism that players can dissect, as well as some fun, if often stressful, combat. Portal 2. Portal 2 is what you get when you take what is already considered a near-perfect game in the form of the original Portal and make it bigger and better in just about every way. In keeping with its thinking with Portal's themes, Portal 2 features plenty of new puzzle mechanics that players will have to figure out, as well as an epic storyline that involves multiple characters, including the founder of Aperture Science himself. Resident Evil 2 Remake. Back when it first came out, Resident Evil 2 was praised for embodying the feeling of an action horror movie in video game form, and the remake from 2019 fulfills the same vision in spades. Players can either take on the role of Claire Redfield or Leon Kennedy as they find themselves at ground zero of the zombie apocalypse taking over the city. Trapped in a police station, Claire and Chris must figure out the dark secrets of the city by navigating the labyrinthian building, as well as the sewers and alleyways of Raccoon City. Alan Wake 2. A mind-bending follow-up to the original Alan Wake, Alan Wake 2 brings players back to the town of Bright Falls. The story picks up right where the original left off, while also introducing a new protagonist in Saga Anderson. Alan Wake 2 continues the original style of storytelling by melding horror with light amounts of comedy thanks to some downright absurd moments, and also features compelling third-person action gameplay. Marvel's Spider-Man Remastered. Quite easily the first Spider-Man game since the PS2 titles to make players truly feel like the superhero. Marvel's Spider-Man Remastered has players take on the role of Peter Parker in his early years. The game has players take on a number of villains from Spider-Man's Rogue Gallery, while also featuring an open world that's fun to swing around in, as well as a compelling story that highlights the humanity that is often lost in superhero stories. Half-Life Alyx. While we might never get Half-Life 3, Half-Life Alyx just so happens to be the next best thing. The core gameplay makes a strong case for why VR gaming can be so much fun, and drops players into the world of Half-Life with a completely new perspective. Along with featuring some downright fantastic levels that seamlessly blend horror and action, Half-Life Alyx is also notable in continuing the story of the franchise in interesting ways, with repercussions even being felt in the ending to Half-Life 2 Episode 2. Crysis. There's a reason Can It Run Crysis became a meme, and even to this day, the game still manages to bring some weaker systems out to their knees. Despite its graphical and technical prowess, Crysis also happens to feature great gameplay thanks to its open-ended mission structure that encourages players to take on enemies in just about any way they can imagine, thanks to the powers they get from their nanosuit armor. Sure, the game's story might not blow your mind, but the sheer amount of freedom that players get more than makes up for it. Mass Effect Legendary Edition. The story of Commander Shepard and the crew of the Normandy is almost one of mythical proportions thanks in no small part to the fantastic storytelling throughout the original Mass Effect trilogy. Sure, there were some weaker points like the ending to Mass Effect 3, but the series still features some of the best writing in video games, thanks to its deep characters and fun side missions along the way. Couple that with some fantastic gunplay, at least from the second game onwards, that pairs well with interesting special abilities, and Mass Effect Legendary Edition becomes a great way to get lost in a universe for a month. Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine 2. A sequel over a decade in the making, Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine 2 puts players back in the power armor of the eponymous Space Marine Titus. After having spent several centuries as a member of the Death Watch, Titus finds himself back in the Ultramarines as he faces down a new threat, a massive invasion by a Tyranid fleet that is also being used as distraction by the forces of chaos, namely the Thousand Sons Traitor Legion. The gameplay is raw, crunchy, and it can be a lot of fun mowing down hundreds of Hormigons with your heavy bolter. Batman Arkham City. While Arkham Knight is the bigger game with more hype behind it, Batman Arkham City is considered by many, us included, as the pinnacle of the series. It expanded on the gameplay first introduced in Arkham Asylum by giving us a big part of Gotham City to glide around in, while also expanding the gameplay by introducing new combat and traversal options. The game also features fantastic performances by villains like Joker and Hugo Strange. XCOM 2. An improvement over XCOM Enemy Unknown in just about every way. XCOM 2 ups the ante not only in the story department by having the players mount a resistance against a world government run by aliens, it also brings with it a host of new gameplay features, including more varied mission types, more enemies, and of course, more ways for players to accidentally end up getting their soldiers killed. Stalker 2: Heart of Chernobyl. The first game in the Stalker series since 2009, Heart of Chernobyl brings players back to the zone of exclusion. Taking place more than a decade after the events of the previous games, Heart of Chernobyl puts players in the shoes of Skiff, an independent stalker who finds themselves in the zone of exclusion for the sake of scientific research. Things quickly start going wrong, however, and Skiff will soon have to figure out how to survive amidst the horrifying creatures that roam the world, as well as the various factions that call the zone home. Half-Life 2. Widely regarded as one of the greatest PC games ever made, and with good reason. At the time of its release, Half-Life 2 not only happened to be a phenomenal shooter with a great campaign, it also happened to be one of the titles of the era that set the benchmark for how good games could look. Of course, it also helped that it acted as one of the major introductions to the Source engine, which went on to power many more games. Need for Speed Most Wanted, 2005. Sure, the game might be almost 2 decades old at this point, but there is a good reason why many consider the original Need for Speed Most Wanted to be the pinnacle of the series. The game features a loose narrative that pits you against elite racers from throughout the city, whilst also letting you free in an open world where you have to take on races and challenges to climb up the ranks of the blacklist. Most Wanted also features all of the car customization features that you know and love from older titles like Underground 2. Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. The Last Crown features a new protagonist while also paying homage to the other games from the genre. On the gameplay front, players will have to explore an expansive map to acquire new abilities so that they can better take on the combat and traversal challenges that only get harder and harder as the game goes on. Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown is easily one of the best games of 2024 and a must-play for fans of platformers. Dead Space Remake. The remake for Dead Space not only brings back the same classic action horror gameplay from the original, it also expands on it in the gameplay front by making just about every weapon more viable, as well as introducing new ways of taking out the vicious necromorphs thanks to a new tech that allows more efficient dismemberments of your enemies. The player takes on the role of Isaac Clarke, who's exploring the bowels of the massive planet cracker class Ishimura, as they battle not only external threats but also ones in his own mind. Wolfenstein: The New Order. A new take on the classic "What if the Nazis?" won World War II alt history formula. Wolfenstein: The New Order has players take on the role of BJ Blazkowicz, who wakes up in 1960 to find that the world is now ruled by Nazis. The game features a mix of high-octane gunplay against hordes of enemies, as well as stealthier missions where players must be more careful about picking their targets. Undertale. An all-time classic, Undertale is an RPG that questions the very nature of the violent actions players often find themselves taking in games. Alongside an excellent story and fun gameplay, Undertale also features a downright fantastic soundtrack with songs that have gone on to become famous on their own merits, with tracks like Megalovania. The game also features quite a bit of replay value thanks to its multiple endings and a different way of playing. Alien Isolation. While many games have players take on aliens, Alien Isolation might be the closest we get to actually experiencing how scary and terrifying it would be to be stuck in a place with a vicious xenomorph hot on your trail. Rather than giving you tools to fight the threat off, you're instead given just enough to be able to hide from it while you figure out a way to escape its clutches. The Elder Scrolls V: Skyrim. Despite being over a decade old, Skyrim still manages to claim a spot as one of the most popular RPGs even to this day, thanks not only to the fact that it features an expansive open world with tons of player choice, but also thanks in large part to the vibrant modding community that the game has managed to foster. You can find mods for just about anything in the game, ranging from new weapons and armor, gameplay mechanics like improved combat, and even large-scale mods like entire epic quest chains. Dishonored 2. Dishonored 2 might have a claim to the title of some of the best level design ever seen in a video game. The stealth action title has players travel to different locations in Sarkanos as either Corvo or Emily as they try to figure out a massive conspiracy led by Delilah. The game also features quite a few gameplay improvements over the original, including new magical abilities and some downright fiendish levels that will have you wondering just how the developers could come up with something as intricate as the Clockwork Mansion. The Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King. An oldie, but a goodie. The Return of the King is a rare licensed movie game that actually happened to be great from an era where movie adaptations were almost always terrible. The game retells the story of the movie, but with a twist. Players will take on the roles of various characters throughout the story, from Frodo to Aragorn, with gameplay changing to emphasize the strengths and weaknesses of each character. Aragorn's levels, for example, focus more on combat, while Frodo will have to rely on stealth in order to survive his dangerous ordeals. Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 1, featuring just about every mainline entry up to the seminal Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. The Master Collection is essentially the definitive way to re-experience some fantastic thriller storylines. Not only did the Metal Gear franchise revolutionize stealth as a genre, it also brought us to one of the most iconic characters in all of gaming in the form of Solid Snake. The game also features some fantastic boss fights, as well as an intriguing meta-narrative that pontificates on the nature of games, sequels, and even the concept of loyalty. Far Cry 3. One of the games that can be credited with shaping open-world games to this day, 2012's Far Cry 3 was a revival of the franchise in a bombastic way. Its simple storyline acts as an excuse for why you'd be running around a tropical island and taking on hordes of terrorists and drug dealers, while also featuring some impressive set pieces. The game also allows players to take on its challenges in whatever ways they see fit, be it long-range stealth with a sniper, or up close and personal with some grenades and a kitted-out AK-47. Braid. Braid was a revolutionary game, not just for its mind-bending puzzles and slick presentation, but also for being one of the titles that essentially brought about indie game development as we see it today. The side-scrolling platformer tells the story of a prince and a princess, but leaves plenty of details open to the player's own interpretation. Coupled with some time-based great puzzle design that makes full use of the title's simplistic gameplay, Braid still makes for an incredibly interesting playthrough even to this day. Disco Elysium. While most RPGs tend to have quite a bit of focus on gameplay, Disco Elysium instead only really has talking as its core mechanic. However, thanks to the incredibly strong writing and interesting themes, Disco Elysium never really gets boring. In fact, the game allows your character to be able to talk according to their RPG stats to give them a different perspective on the world. Disco Elysium is one of the most unique titles to have come out in recent times, and its excellent writing is a large reason why. Max Payne 2: The Fall of Max Payne. While the original Max Payne was an excellent action game in its own right, its sequel essentially improved on the original in every way possible. The game features a thrilling tale where our protagonist Max Payne is tasked with investigating a well-funded group of assassins. The game also features some great side characters, including the assassin Mona Sachs, as well as some great action set pieces. Interestingly enough, Max Payne 2 would also mark the first time developer Remedy Entertainment would collaborate with the band Poets of the Fall for some music. The Elder Scrolls 3: Morrowind. While Skyrim may still be one of the most popular games of all time, Morrowind is still a title worth revisiting thanks to the game featuring one of the most interesting settings in the entire franchise. Set on the island of Vanderfell, Morrowind puts players in the shoes of a nobody who must rise the ranks of the local politics as they uncover the secrets hidden in the island's volcano. Morrowind features a downright bizarre world, lots of factions to play around with, an incredibly interesting main story, and the same fantastic modding community that the franchise is known for at this point. Borderlands 2. While the original Borderlands laid the foundation for the genre that would go on to become known as the looter shooter, Borderlands 2 is where developer Gearbox seemingly perfected the formula. Not only does the game feature millions, if not billions, of randomly generated guns that players can find, it also includes a fun story with a memorable cast of characters, and an especially remarkable antagonist in the form of Handsome Jack. Borderlands 2 features a massive world with plenty of side quests, as well as a host of playable characters, each with their own unique abilities. Cuphead. While it might look like a standard side-scrolling platformer, Cuphead is actually closer in spirit to a boss rush game. Players step into the shoes of the eponymous Cuphead as he battles an expansive list of enemies, all with an art style based on classic cartoons complete with hand-drawn animations. Cuphead not only looks downright brilliant in action, but also manages to be incredibly fun thanks in large part to how easy it is to get into the game, and how hard it is to actually beat any of its bosses. Cuphead also likes to change things up by featuring the rare platforming level, or even shoot-'em-up segments where you get to ride a plane as you take on a massive boss in the sky. Gears 5. While Gears of War 4 brought with it major change to the status quo with its new protagonist, Gears 5 doubles down on the idea, choosing to move away from the Phoenix family to instead focus on Kate and her relationship with her own mother. The game features small open-world segments that encourage exploration, a great vehicle that's really fun to ride through the game's many canyons, and a host of new weapons and enemies to fight. While the core gameplay hasn't changed much since the first series started, Gears 5 feels like a refinement on just about everything we've seen from the franchise. Star Wars Jedi Survivor. While the game might suffer from several technical problems that make playing it even on modern systems a pain, once you dial down on the right settings, Star Wars Jedi Survivor manages to be a great time. It features an expanded moveset from its predecessor, allowing players to use their lightsabers in new and interesting ways, while also expanding on just about every other aspect of the core gameplay. The story picks up right where Fallen Order left off, with protagonist Cal Kestis setting off to redeem the Jedi Order in the battle against the forces of the Empire. Dragon Age Origins. Widely regarded as one of the best titles by BioWare, Dragon Age Origins is a darker, more gritty take on fantasy. The game features quite a few mature themes, including consequences for slavery and internal politics of the various factions throughout the world of Thetis. Gameplay focuses on the ability to play it as a tactical RPG that can be paused at any time, allowing players to set up their party members with different commands. Diablo 4. While the action RPG genre is thriving, with games of all shapes and sizes being available these days, Diablo 4 is still a notable title since it brings its own interesting ideas to the table, including a non-randomized open world that is shared with other players. Diablo 4 features a new cast of protagonists and antagonists, with the more recent expansion also bringing players to the swamp zone of Karust from Diablo 2. Couple that with great gameplay that offers tons of build options in just about every playstyle you can imagine, and Diablo 4 is a fun way to kill a few weeks worth of time. Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell: Chaos Theory. While the Splinter Cell franchise continued for a couple of games after Chaos Theory, they never quite managed to hit the peaks of gameplay and storytelling that this game reaches, featuring intense stealth gameplay that has players pay attention to not only to the line of sight of enemies, but also to the ambient lighting and sounds. Splinter Cell Chaos Theory can easily be considered one of the most engaging stealth titles out there. There's also a great plot filled with political intrigue, as well as a host of interesting levels throughout the game. System Shock 2. One of the big releases that can claim to have originated the immersive sim genre, System Shock 2 melds role-playing games with horror in a way that is still unmatched by any other game. System Shock 2 puts players on a space station that has been taken over by a hostile AI, as well as an alien parasite that seemingly works as a hive mind. The player must make their way throughout the different parts of the ship as they take on enemies and avoid security cameras, while also slowly uncovering the events that led to the current state of affairs. Fallout 3. The game that took Fallout from 2D to 3D, Fallout 3 brings us to a post-apocalyptic rendition of the area near the former American capital city of Washington. Much like the Elder Scrolls games, Fallout 3 features a great open world filled to the brim with places to explore, as well as a ton of side quests to take on. While the main plot itself is quite mediocre, there are so many things to do in the game that it doesn't really matter, and the side quests on their own are more than enough motivation for anyone to keep playing, just to see what might happen next. Pair that with a great modding community and you essentially have nearly limitless content to play through. Deus Ex. The original Deus Ex rightfully takes its place as one of the greatest games ever made, thanks to its revolutionizing not only its own genre, but video games as a whole. Just about every game to have come out since Deus Ex owes something to the title, be its take on first-person stealth, the level of freedom it offers and how to take on objectives, or the incredible story it tells by mashing together just about every conspiracy theory you can imagine. Deus Ex laid the groundwork for just about every shooter since it came out, from Half-Life 2 to Prey, and still remains a game worth revisiting. Hi-Fi Rush. While vibes alone don't make a great game, Hi-Fi Rush pairs its excellent vibes up there with some really fun gameplay and an entertaining story that has the protagonist Chai take on the establishment armed with little more than a music player attached to his heart, and a guitar formed by magnetically pulling together different bits of metal lying around. Hi-Fi Rush's unique claim to fame is how well it makes use of its soundtrack, integrating it with the hack-and-slash gameplay to become sort of a rhythm game that rewards great timing. It also certainly helps that the soundtrack is fantastic, featuring artists like the Black Keys and 9 Inch Nails. Thief 2: The Metal Age. The follow-up to seminal first-person stealth title Thief 2: The Metal Age ups the ante by allowing players to bring even more tools to their various missions, but also making sure that players would need those tools by including larger, more intricate levels. Thief 2: The Metal Age heavily emphasizes stealth gameplay, since protagonist Garrett can't really fight the horde of guards that he might find coming his way if his footsteps happen to be too loud. Thief 2: The Metal Age, while being an older title, is still worth revisiting thanks to its compelling gameplay and story. Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons. Far from a large-scale title that has the player set off to save the world, Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons tells a much more personal story that has the player take control of a pair of siblings as they set off on a quest to find a mysterious tree that might be the key to saving their ill father. The game is heavier on the emotional side of things, as players will come to understand the bond between the two titular brothers, purely through gameplay. The game also deals with themes of loss and grief and how a person can move on from tragic events in their lives. Grand Theft Auto 4. While GTA 5 might be the pinnacle of the franchise so far, it's hard to ignore just how important Grand Theft Auto 4 was. The game features an accurate representation of New York as its take on Liberty City, while also telling an interesting and personal story about the concept of the American dream. GTA 4 also happens to feature two excellent expansions set in the same time frame as the main story, but feature new protagonists. These expansions give players a new perspective on Liberty City, complete with shifts in types of missions. Doom 2016. Hailed as the return of the classic shooter franchise with good reason, Doom 2016 is a power fantasy that pits players as the lone soldier against hordes of invading demons with an arsenal of high-powered sci-fi weapons. While the story starts off by feeling like a retelling of the original Doom, things quickly start going off the rails as the protagonist, the Doomslayer, starts learning about the events that led to the demonic invasion to happen in the first place. Doom 2016 still stands on its own as a fantastic game, thanks to its simple philosophy of giving you a shotgun, some metal music, and a room full of demons to take down. Forza Horizon 5. Following up on the blueprint set by Forza Horizon 3 and 4, Forza Horizon 5 takes players to a car festival taking place in Mexico. The game is essentially a refinement of the ideas brought in by its predecessors in just about every way, featuring hundreds of cars that can be driven across an expansive and incredibly diverse map. The game also brings in more tools that allow for players' customization on an incredible level, be it decorating their cars with fancy liveries or even just coming up with their own race events. Hitman 2. A follow-up to 2016's Hitman, Hitman 2 picks up right where the story left off, bringing players to 6 brand new levels: Hawke's Bay in New Zealand, Miami, Colombia, Mumbai, Vermont, and the Isle of Sgil. Hitman 2 brought with it quite a few upgrades over its predecessor, with small but crucial changes, like the fact that NPCs can now notice you through reflections and mirrors. At its core, however, Hitman 2 still managed to be a downright fantastic stealth/puzzle hybrid game that not only encouraged experimentation, but also happened to be incredibly accessible for new players by offering guided ways to complete the game's various objectives. Oh, did we mention that you could also play the original Hitman levels in the new gameplay engine, complete with its new features and equipment? Yakuza 0. One of the rare games that manages to somehow be a prequel while also improving the emotional impact that later games would have. Yakuza 0 tells the story of Kazuma Kiryu and Goro Majima in their early days as members of Japan's various crime families. The game does a wonderful job of recreating the bustling nightlife of Japan during the country's economic boom of the 1980s, while also telling a downright heartbreaking story full of betrayal and acts of kindness that would be right at home in any crime drama. Pair that with some incredibly goofy and lighthearted moments in its sub-stories, and you have what can easily be considered to be one of the best games in the Yakuza franchise. Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain. While the older Metal Gear games laid the foundations for what would eventually be known as the stealth genre, The Phantom Pain brings its own spin to open-world titles. Giving players an incredible level of freedom in taking on their objectives, Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain is one of the most engaging open-world titles out there, regardless of if you prefer to sneak around or pull out your automatic shotgun and start taking enemies down. Pair that with a story that, while incomplete, still manages to be quite entertaining thanks to antagonists like Skullface. Armored Core 6: Fires of Rubicon. A triumphant return for From Software to one of its older franchises, Armored Core 6: Fires of Rubicon puts players in the cockpit of one of their titular armored cores, as they take on missions as a mercenary that pits them against opposing military forces and other armored cores. One of the biggest selling points of the game is the level of customization it offers for your mech, allowing you to swap out just about any part you might want in order to be better tailor-matched for your mech on the missions at hand. Couple that with the fantastic mission design and incredible boss fights, and Armored Core 6: Fires of Rubicon proves itself to be one of the best games of its type out there. Telltale's The Walking Dead Season 1. The game that essentially kicked off Telltale's reputation for story-based games a decade ago, The Walking Dead Season 1 tells a small-scale story of a man and a young girl trying to survive the horrors of the zombie apocalypse, as well as the horrors of what people become in desperate times. While the gameplay is simple point-and-click, the writing alone will be enough to compel just about anyone to keep playing, just to see how protagonist Lee and Clementine will manage to survive. Hey, did you know that we at GamingBolt upload new videos every day? Stick around, drop a like, subscribe, and hit that bell. And let us know what kind of content you'd like to see in the future with a comment below.